Hey everybody, Joe Blair here again. Waiting for Kwindla to come on board, but wow, I'm just still reeling from that keynote with Jennifer and Darren. Just so many gems, so many kind of insights that are so valuable. Um, so yeah, Kwindla is getting in right now. Um, can we promote? Oh, there he is. All right, Kwindla, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to
Um,
see you.
yeah, wow, what a day. I were just really mind has been blown so far, and I'm really excited for this chat with you, Kwindla. I think people know me, but I'd love to just get started by just having you kind of introduce yourself, introduce Daily.co, and just let's start from there.
Sure. I'm an engineer. I like building big internet-based systems and video in particular. I've been working on various flavors of both of those things since I was in grad school at the MIT Media Lab a really long time ago. We started a daily 4 years ago because we wanted to build the next generation of video platforms around the then very new standard WebRTC. We thought video was going to become something we all do every single day in almost everything we do online. The
Hmm.
video was going to become a first class citizen of almost every kind of product user experience and community and game and commercial interaction. Uh, so we really wanted to build tools for that. We wanted to help democratize video, and we are an API platform. You can come and use our APIs to build interactive video experiences. A little bit like this one, which I'm a huge fan of.
Awesome. Well, and I'd love it if you could share a little bit of your kind of history, kind of leading up to founding the company, and just kind of like walk us through chronologically, maybe a bit about your time at Oblong, and then kind of help walk us towards like the pre-COVID and then the post-COVID, and just help us understand that journey for you.
Sure. I mean, I got really interested in like digital video when the Nokia phones that you could first play like 120 by 120 pixel video on over like a cellular data network came out. Um, so it's been a long evolution of the kind of CPU and network and device capabilities and standards and ecosystems and now kind of social and community assumptions about what's useful to do online have evolved. And I've tried to kind of track that with the things I've done professionally. My previous startup was a company I founded with a friend of mine from grad school in Los Angeles called Oblong Industries. My friend John had done the gestural interfaces in the film Minority Report. So we had a really good calling card. And we had built a big tech stack around multi-user, multi-screen, multi-device computing. So you could walk into a room with screens everywhere. You could bring your laptop, you could bring your phone, and you could run applications that were built on top of our stack that ran across all those screens and that connected to other rooms like that elsewhere in the world. It started out as a research project, sort of science experiment. We gradually productized it to the point where we were competing with and co-selling with, because enterprise sales are always complicated, with Cisco telepresence. So companies like GE and Saudi Aramco and IBM would buy, 10 telepresence rooms and 10 of our rooms, and they'd kind of use them sometimes together, sometimes differently, for things like board meetings, really high-end sales demos, scientific data visualization, sort of BI presentations. And that was our attempt to build the sort of super dense, super rich, video heavy, data heavy, collaborative world we kind of wanted to live in as technologists. That was really a great learning curve for an engineering founder. I mean, we grew that company from 2 to 120 people, had a kind of successful arc overall as an enterprise sales oriented company. But if you've done startups, you know that arc was really a whole lot of this, right? A whole lot of learning. Um,
If you average it, it kind of looks like that.
exactly. So by about, so I wrote a whole lot of code for 4 years, and then for about 4 years, I was on a plane all the time with our bag carrying sales guys. And we had at one point, I think, once we had sort of gotten to product market fit, we had like 14 sales offices all around the world because we really had to kind of go where our Fortune 500 customers were. And that was really, really interesting. But also, I got tired of not building new stuff. So when we had a chance to exit from that company, I took a couple of years off, built a whole bunch of prototypes on top of WebRTC, because WebRTC just had that feeling that if it kind of took, it would be the nucleus of a new ecosystem that would change what you could do with video, like how quickly you could build, how widely you could deploy without, making people buy hardware or, install super custom applications or whatever. And that, once you've done this kind of thing for a while, you sort of have a sense of when ecosystems start to form around to new technologies, the possibilities can get really exciting. And we felt like there was a tipping point coming, and we wanted to build for that, help it happen, and take advantage of that wave.
Wow. So you saw all this coming. That's pretty impressive.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think, if you've been obsessed with something for a while, you always think the tipping point is coming. I think we were probably a little early, right? Like 2016 was actually a little too early to start this company. But we built kind of methodically towards at least some aspects of the future we thought were happening. And then, I thought it was really interesting something you said with Ho Yin. I was listening to your conversation an hour or so ago, and you were saying that like Remo saw an uptick starting in 2019, like before the 2020 kind of craziness around video and collaboration and new live experiences. And we did too. So we had like lots of interesting stuff, but no product market fit before 2019. We had some interesting partnerships, and we launched some stuff that I thought was like good tech, but it was only in 2019 that we really started to see that the uptake, the sort of what you feel as product market fit when you're a startup person. So 2019 was actually kind of a big year for us in that sense, and we had a really good plan coming into 2020. We thought to like build on that, and then everything changed in March in 2020.
Yeah. So just to put a point on that, could you tell us just a little bit about that when it started to click in 2019, like what sort of use cases, what sort of customers you were seeing, and then COVID hitting, and then what that experience was like in kind of opening up use cases, opening up different industries?
So there were a couple things that happened like tail end of 2018, beginning of 2019. One was Apple finally released pretty good Safari support for WebRTC. So that by itself was a big step function in like who we could market to, because we could say, we really do support all the platforms that your users are going to use really well with one click, no download video. You're on an iPhone, you're on a desktop computer, doesn't matter. You click on a link and like you're in your immersive video experience. So that was sort of a catalyst for us to launch a completely self-serve API, what we sometimes call in our little Silicon Valley world, like a Stripe style developer experience. You just come in, you sign up with us, and you're like using live video with a few lines of code right away. So we launched that in Q1 2019 and started to publicize what we were doing as the sort of the easiest way to embed video into your application. And we started to get lots of telehealth, like customer support, some fintech around know your customer regulations and like challenger bank stuff, and early indications of like future of work, interesting things getting built. So what we colloquially and internally call the next Slack, which of course Slack is an investor in us, so we always have to caveat that and say the next Slack might be Slack as well. but we think the next Slack is going to be really video centric. Like that's our worldview and our model is that Slack did this amazing job changing how we all work in this kind of hybrid synchronous asynchronous mode. And to us, the obvious place to push on that to get the next big evolution in how we work is the asynchronous and synchronous video stuff. So can you connect really seamlessly to everyone you work with across all the modalities that you use to work? So text, application integrations, audio, video. And we see a bunch of startups working on that in super interesting ways. We are seeing Slack and Microsoft Teams do interesting stuff there. And players like Dropbox and other kind of people that are adjacent coming in from their own angle. So we started to see that last year too. What changed in 2020 was, first of all, just volume. Like the volume of people who were like ready and prioritizing video just skyrocketed. People who had been sort of thinking about video now had to do it. People who hadn't been thinking about it at all were now thinking about it. But the use cases changed as well. We saw a lot of the use cases people came to us for in 2019, but they didn't really know how to think about them from an economic model. Now, all of a sudden, are like absolutely top of mind for people, both building and using them. And the single biggest version of that is larger meetings. So almost everybody last year wanted, 15-person meetings from us. And now we see a lot of 100, 200, 500-person hybrid, large meeting, flexible experiences, really a lot like Remo. So like you and I are in sort of a 2-person meeting, but a whole bunch of people are also consuming this, this experience, and participating back through chat. And then a whole lot of other people are adjacent to what we're doing in other live sessions that are part of the same broader experience. And so Remo's a really good example of like thinking through how you can build these new hybrid experiences. And we see that across the board, and not just kind of Remo-like things, but yoga and fitness classes, online education stuff, social and gaming experiences that are kind of like quiz show type environments where you're with a bunch of people and then you're kind of in a small group, and then you're with a bunch of people again, then you're in a small group. Lots of evolution of that. Watch parties, kind of dating and social experiences that have all moved online. And our feeling is that a bunch of stuff we thought would happen in 2022, 2023 has just been pulled forward by, some increment of years rather than months.
Wow. Fascinating. I liked how you started this whole conversation with Nokia, and it's so funny because it's so funny to think back. You just reminded me. I remember when I first got color on my cell phone, like colored video, and it was like this little graphic, and it's just amazing how far things have come in such a short period of time. The other question that comes to mind for me is, a lot of founders have questions, like let's say they have some core insight around technology. They struggle with, how do we want to bring this to market? What business model? And I think, unlike a lot of the speakers at today's event, or I should say there are a few others, but I would say in the minority, you guys are kind of offering a core technology platform that's available to a wide number of applications, a wide number of other companies. So it's kind of a technology enabler. How did you think about that in terms of business model, going horizontal versus vertical, and just how you think about growth in that way?
I think on some level you have to do what gets you up in the morning, right? What is most fun, and building for a bunch of use cases is, to me personally, really, really interesting. So if you can get kind of what I think of as the plumbing layer right, you support all this stuff that you could never imagine yourself. And I like building application level stuff. I think it's super interesting and fun, but something about helping other people build a huge variety of things, including things that just feel really innovative, like multiplicative on top of what I'm doing, always really kind of makes me super happy. So we knew what we were trying to do was build tools for the WebRTC ecosystem very early on, tools for video really broadly. What we didn't know was how to get there. In 2016, we actually shipped a hardware product initially because we had built a bunch of prototypes of different kinds of applications, and WebRTC was so new, like in-browser video, like no download, one-click video calls was so new that we really couldn't support end users effectively unless we boxed up everything and like handed it to them in like a literally a physical package. So our first product was a very, very affordable system for conference rooms and remote workers that you could set up video calls and screen sharing in 5 minutes just by plugging it in to a wall outlet and putting in your Wi-Fi credentials. That's not so surprising now. That was really new in 2016. There was no Google hardware, there was no Zoom hardware, there was high-end hardware from Cisco. There wasn't much other stuff on the market. So we thought, well, this is a way we can build a really good stack, get non-trivial amounts of usage to like iterate what we're doing. And it is a market gap. Now, we don't know how big a market opportunity it is because we don't know how fast this market is going to evolve, but it seems like it's a stake worth putting in the ground. And the catalyst for actually doing a company rather than just continuing to build stuff that I thought was personally interesting was taking that product to the point where we could write a Y Combinator application about it with conviction and then go through that sort of YC application process. And so when YC accepted us with that as our product and a business model built around like a initial wedge as conference room hardware, we're like, okay, this is the next company. This is what we're doing. We shipped that hardware for about 3 years actually. But it was clear about a year in that that market had gotten really competitive. So about 6 months after we shipped the hardware, Zoom did launch hardware. Google did launch hardware. And we thought, okay, so this is no longer a blue ocean type business model space, but we do believe in the overall sort of thesis that video is going to be everywhere. So let's work more on the software side and see where things go.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing that you're able to just because of the way the industry evolved around you. You know, probably on one sense, it probably felt like a threat, like you were saying, it was getting too competitive. But on the other side, because of what Apple did with their platform, you were able to abstract your whole business away from the hardware component. So that's fascinating the way that evolves. Again, it's like it's the up and downs.
It is, and I think we were right, at least on some level, about the big thesis. We were wrong, I think, in some specifics about where the initial market opportunity was. But I was very resistant to calling it a pivot because I really felt like what we were building towards had this real kind of consistent direction. But one of our angel investors, Simil Shah, or early seed investor, Simil Shah, when we were raising Series A this year, Simil was like, I just had a great conversation about you with somebody. I was like, a lot of persistence. They pivoted 3 times and now look at their growth. And I was like, no, we didn't. And Simil was like, yes, we did. And I was like, all right, cool.
in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But no, I would sort of agree. I don't see it as a pivot, and I don't see it as as being wrong, right? It seems like I think it's just the natural progression.
I mean, I'm
how a
happy
startup
to be
needs
wrong,
to go
just not
through.
wrong for long, right? Like that's what the people who work with me have heard me say that a lot. Like it's totally fine to be wrong. You just can't be wrong for very long.
Yeah. I mean, that's you could abstract that to the scientific method, right? And that's totally what it's all about. Wanted to ask you, the theme of the conference is like the new normal and what's changed for good. Wanted to ask you about some of the use cases that you've seen that have really surprised you, and kind of your thoughts on like which of those use cases like are really, do you think, are going to stick, and which ones do you think will kind of ebb and flow as we move forward?
So there's a few different kind of buckets of that. One is the niche use cases that surprise us are always super fun. Like we have a customer who does live animal auctions. I would not have, built a product for live animal auctions. Like I don't know enough to do that, right? But it's really fun to have like a developer tool stack that somebody could use for the thing they do. And I honestly don't know whether live animal auctions will stick beyond, COVID era online, but it's easy to imagine they would, right? Because once you get the benefits of convenience of certain kinds of distance, like enabling people not to have to physically go somewhere, like that's actually a big improvement. Now, maybe there are reasons why there are live in-person benefits that are hard to replicate, but it's hard to argue with the convenience of being able to do anything from anywhere. The other trend we see generally, which I sort of map onto stuff I don't know anything about and try to learn from our customers about it, is once you go virtual with something, you start out emulating what the physical thing was, and then you push beyond it. And this is one of those history of technology tropes that people like to talk about. I think the first movies were plays with like a camera stuck right in front where an audience member would sit, and no movie today looks like a play with the camera, stuck in the front row, static. So the whole language of cinema evolved to suit the technology. The technology co-evolved with that. We see some of the same stuff happening around like a platform like Remo, where it is not the same as a physical wedding. In some ways, you can do more and different things than you could do in a physical wedding if you host your wedding on Remo. So the sort of micro use cases always surprise and impress us. The sort of big companies experimenting with retail are kind of the next piece of that to me. People figuring out how to try to sell cars when you're not able to bring them into the showroom, or people selling makeup when you're not going into a department store. Those are both very high touch sales traditionally. And how do you make them high touch virtually? There's a lot. We're seeing a lot of super interesting kind of development there from our customers. And the future of work stuff is really exploding. So like, how do you communicate well if you're not all in the same office? I think we're all sort of way more motivated to think hard about that than we were 9 months ago. And I think in a year or two, a lot of our assumptions about work are just going to be different and unpredictable in really interesting ways.
Gotcha. And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned some of your investors. You mentioned you're raising a Series A, or you've raised the Series A. What can you tell us about like the kind of response or reactions from the investment community to what you're doing, both pre-COVID and post-COVID, and kind of what that experience has been like for you as a founder?
You're always telling a story like about where you think the world is going to go as a founder. And I mean, my experience generally in fundraising over, a couple of companies and a bunch of years is it's a percentage game. It's like any kind of sales interaction. You're going to find the people who are relevant to the story you're telling, who like believe the aspects of it, it resonates with. And I mean, generally in venture fundraising, that's like a 1 in 10 or something like that, hit rate. And that was certainly true for us from 2016 through the end of 2019, where we would tell the story about video going to be everywhere in the world. And an analogy I really like is Stripe, because I think we're trying to build a great developers platform, and the horizontal market is just huge. And 1 in 10 people would be like, oh yeah, I really get that. Like, you're a DevTools platform and you think everybody's gonna need it. And 9 in 10 would say, yeah, I don't think as many people are gonna build video applications as need payments. I mean, every website needs payments. Not every website needs video. And I have learned over the years just not to argue with that. Like, I actually believe that's wrong, that kind of every application is going to need video to an order of magnitude degree that's the same as like every application needs payments. But if I have to argue about that, then we're never going to get to a yes on the investment. What flipped in 2020 was the conversations were like 9 out of 10 people were like, oh yeah, video is really, really important. And 1 out of 10 were like, yeah, I'm not sure whether video is bigger than a niche. And that was amazing as an entrepreneur to live through, because you think about fundraising in a certain way and it's super hard. Like, everybody who's started a company knows that fundraising is really tough, and you get better at it. You kind of develop some skills. You understand a little bit more about how the market works so you can position yourself better, but it never gets easy. And then in 2020, we were just in this really kind of unusual moment where what we were doing was something everybody was interested in, and it was just a really different way to talk to investors.
Yeah, well, that's a really humble way of saying that, and I appreciate that. And I would also say that insight, I think you have, it kind of shows the experience, because you do see more inexperienced founders kind of arguing, to the VC, well, you don't get it, this and that. But so I like your kind of more nuanced perspective is, okay, you don't get it, like, no problem, like, not a fit. So that's interesting. Switching gears, I just wanted to ask you about, we're talking a lot about external and kind of the commercial environment, but internally, what's it been like for you as the CEO, kind of shifting to managing a more remote team? Like, what were your internal policies beforehand, afterwards? What's that been like for you?
So we were always remote, although I think we were a little more agnostic about, maybe we'll have more of a center of gravity in San Francisco as we grow. But we always supported remote work, partly because I have friends who I want to work with, engineers and marketing people I think are amazing. And if they're not in San Francisco, I still want to work with them. So we were pretty motivated early on to know we were going to be like remote first. Obviously, that's even more true now. And it coincides with growth for us because we were, quite small, just a handful of people, very conservative about hiring, coming into 2020. We had a hiring plan. We like hit all our hiring goals for the year in, June, and went back and made another hiring plan that was the sort of same size. So we're like on this big growth trajectory. It's helpful to have done it before, because I think hiring is also hard. And so being able to kind of know the the patterns that have worked in the past and haven't worked for hiring has been really, really helpful for me in 2020. And I'm happy to talk about that if it's useful, but it's also a little bit off the topic of just video. On the remote first thing, I have learned that some people are really happy and productive remote and some people aren't, and that's not a value judgment. So I try really hard in hiring to like push on that. So if you worked remote before, that's a good sign. It's not necessary for us, but it's a good sign. But I have a lot of conversations with people about like how they work, like what gives them energy and satisfaction, how we do things, whether that feels to them like it's going to work well. Because I want to avoid hiring somebody who is just not going to be happy, even though we're in other ways a good fit for them. So that's one thing I pay a lot of attention to. And then we also build really kind of intentionally a bunch of remote first communications patterns. So at our current size, we're a little too big, but not quite too big. And we still do a daily stand up with everybody synchronously where everybody goes around and says briefly what they're working on. I think that's a general, like a lot of remote stuff, I think that's generally kind of useful. But with remote, I think it's really, really useful because people don't have a water cooler or a lunch table to build connections. So hearing what you're working on every day from everybody really briefly is super, super helpful. We use a tool called Donut, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, that randomly pairs people up with coffee and donuts. And then we work really hard on like gardening our Slack behavior. And we use Notion and Airtable in ways that feel hopefully good for asynchronous organization.
Got it. Excellent. And could you paint us a picture? Just to, if we all have our crystal balls here, can you paint us a picture as to what the next decade's going to look like? Like whether it's through the lens of video or future of work more broadly. Just help us understand your thoughts on where this is all going.
So I do think a lot of the things that we assume we have to go in person to do are going to feel like great experiences remote and on video. My favorite example of that is fitness classes, just because we have so many customers now trying to figure out what the right kind of UX for fitness classes is. And the reason it's my favorite example is because I will literally never myself go to a fitness class in a gym. It just doesn't, like, it's just not my thing. And it's great that it works well for a lot of people. I'm some combination of introverted and, shy and busy, right? Like there's some piece of that, but I've done, because we have these customers, a bunch of virtual fitness classes and they're great and I will do them. So there's like this market expansion of things that we all do that when they're also available online additively to, their sort of more traditional experiences, just totally expand the market and expand accessibility in all sorts of interesting ways. And I think you can map that onto like future of work with how we hire and how we kind of give people flexibility to do family stuff and to be in different geographies, which I think you've talked about in some of the other sessions today, which is really interesting. And I don't think it's an either or. I don't think every company is going to go remote first or even particularly remote friendly, but I think a lot will. And even companies that aren't remote first will learn from and benefit from some of the stuff that we're all inventing together in this era.
Yeah. Another kind of example of that recently where just a light bulb went off for me was it was last night. We were talking with our children's school, and someone asked the question like, okay, well, what's gonna be permanently changed, even when everyone's back to school. And the one thing they said was like, well, we found that like parent-teacher conferences like really work well over video conference at night when the kids have gone to bed. And it was the type of thing like no one would have ever thought of that before, right? It was always, okay, we got to take off work, we got to go in the office, got to meet the teachers for the specific day. But like, I feel like that's another example, like to your point, of something that virtual experience is just a step change better than the in-person experience. So I think we're going to continue to have these light bulb moments, and with a lot of these things probably powered by daily.co. So Kwindla, I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. It's really fun to talk to you, and I really appreciate the invitation.
Awesome. Thanks so much. All right. Well, we're going to transition to our next speakers here. And so Thanks, Kwindla, and look forward to our next session here in the Coda Room with Elizabeth and Chase.